All right, here we go. March 30th. Algebra 2, quarantine, e-learning. Let's go. We're going to review on how to graph. So your assignment today is going to be half graphing, and it's going to be the other half kind of review of the unit circle. So we reviewed the unit circle last week, so I'm not too worried about that. The graphing, though, we haven't done in a while, so I just wanted to hit 3 examples where we do a little phase shift, we do a little stretch. Maybe we shift the midline around a little bit just to remember kind of how to do that. So if we have y equals a sine or cosine b, parentheses x minus h plus k, all these variables are going to do something to my graph. A is going to stretch it, so that's going to be the amplitude. So if a is 5, it'll go up to 5 and down to -5. K is going to be your midline shift, so that's your vertical shift. That kind of dictates where the midline is, right? So here the midline is going to be 1. Here there's nothing after the equal sign, or after the parentheses, so the midline here is going to be 0. And then same thing here, the midline is going to be 0. B is going to control your period. So the period, remember, is how long it takes to complete one full cycle or one complete revolution around the unit circle. And the period here is going to be, normally it takes 2 pi, but then you have to take 2 pi and you have to divide by whatever that b term is to get what the period of the graph is going to be. And the last thing that we touched on in class, but we didn't hit too hard, I want to make sure we go back and make sure we all understand what this is. This is going to be your horizontal shift, or we call it your phase shift. And remember, just like with all of our parabolas and all that good stuff, if I add inside the parentheses, that's going to move it to the left. And if I subtract inside the parentheses, that's going to move it to the right. Okay, and then remember, sine is going to start at your midline, so sine starts at 0. And cosine starts at 1. Because the sine, or whatever your amplitude is, the sine of 0 is 0, and the cosine of 0 is 1. And then from there, we just hit those 4 quadrants. So remember, it looks like this. 0, it takes 2 pi to go all the way around the circle. Cut it in half, we get pi. Now, you could cut it in half, or you could take these two, add them together, and divide by 2. So 0 plus pi is pi, divided by 2 is pi over 2. And then same thing here. Pi plus 2 pi is 3 pi. Divided by 2 is 3 pi over 2. And then sine will look like this. Go up to 1, go down to -1. Back here. Choo choo. Right, and then cosine looks similar, but instead of starting at 0, it starts up at the top of the amplitude. And finishes back up high. And then remember, if I have like a negative in front, if my amplitude is negative, that's not a negative amplitude, because the amplitude is always positive. It just takes the curve in it and flips everything. Okay, so let's do a couple examples here. So here, this thing is going to be my amplitude, because it's out in front of the parentheses. This is going to be my midline shift, or my vertical shift. And then my period here is going to be 2 pi divided by 1, which is just going to be 2 pi. So that's kind of nice. My period here is going to be 2 pi. And there's no phase shift because I'm not adding anything inside of the parentheses. So if I were to graph this thing, I would start by drawing this. And I can go up to 3. Oh, wait, actually, my amplitude here, or sorry, my midline is at 1. And then I can go up past 3, I can go up to 4, or I can go down to -2, because my amplitude is 3. So 1 to 4 is 3, and 1 to -2 is also 3. And then from here, my period isn't changing because that's going to stay the same on the inside. That b term and the h term are both, well, the b term is 1, the h term is 0. So that means I can go 2 pi out, just like normal, divide by 2, divide by 2, multiply by 3. And then we know that sine starts at the midline. So it goes here, 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 and back. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, that's one cycle. Cool. Example 2, so a couple differences here. First of all, I know the amplitude is going to be 1. So that's how high the graph's going to go. I also know that it's going to start at 0, so I know this is just going to be a nice kind of midline at 0. The amplitude is up to 1 and -1, so that's kind of nice. Now the weird thing about this one, there's a 1 here, so we know the period is going to be 2 pi. But the weird thing about this one is that we have to go to the left pi over 3 to start. So this is where I start, pi over 3. That makes it a little tougher. But luckily I know that period of this thing is going to be 2 pi. So if I start at pi over 3 and I go 2 pi, that's the same as 6 pi over 3 when I get a common denominator. So negative pi over 3 plus 6 pi over 3 gets me to 5 pi over 3. So I know it's going from negative pi over 3 to 5 pi over 3. Now, finding the other things, I'll do this in a different color because it gets a little tricky. What I have to do is I have to find the midpoint between negative pi over 3 and 5 pi over 3. So the way I do that is I just add them together and divide by 2. So I'll do this kind of over here. Add them together, I got 4 pi over 3 divided by 2. So that's the same as multiplying by 1/2. So that's going to give me 2 pi over 3. So I know that is my middle hash mark. Now, I need to find one more here, and I need to find one more here. So I know there's going to be one like in this area, and I know there's going to be one like in this area. So to find this one, I take these two, add them together. Negative pi over 3 plus 2 pi over 3 is going to be pi over 3, and then divided by 2. So this is actually going to be at pi over 3 divided by 2 is going to be pi over 6. So I know this is going to be pi over 6. Not too bad. And then this one, 5 pi plus 2 pi is 7 pi over 3. So I'm just adding them. And then I multiply by 1/2, 7 pi. So this one doesn't multiply, I can't cancel anything out. So it's just going to be 7 pi over 6. Okay. Now, last thing, I got to draw my little marks here. So cosine starts high, and it's a positive amplitude or a positive coefficient in front. So I know it's going to start here, up at, too high, up at 1, not there. And then it's going to go to 0, and then down to -1, and then back to 0, and then back up to 1. My spacing is a little suspect. There you go. So that's the phase shift. The phase shift's a little weird. Basically, all you do is you go, okay, it's positive, so that means it's going to the left, pi over 3. We know the period was 2 pi, so I know to make this 2 pi right here, which is the same as 6 pi over 3, which is 5 pi over 3. And then I cut it in half. Add these two together, divide by 2. Add these two together, divide by 2, and that's how I get these 4 hash marks. Add these two together, divide by 2, divide by 2. Cool. All right, last one. I'll switch back to my purple pen. Last one. This one's a little different. So if you look here, some people see this 2 out in front, and they're like, okay, that means the amplitude's 2. Now remember, the amplitude's out in front of the sign. So here, when I write it like this, it looks a little bit easier maybe. So I know my midline is at 0. I know my amplitude goes up to 1 and down to -1. The thing is in front of the x. So you might see it like this. It's the same thing, y equals sine 2x. It could look like that too. All you do to find the period is you take the coefficient in front of the x and you make it your b term. So it's 2 pi divided by 2. So now instead of completing one revolution in 2 pi, it's going to complete one revolution in pi. And then this one's nice because it doesn't have a phase shift. This is at 0, that's at pi, divide by 2, pi over 2, divide by 2, pi over 4, multiply by 3, 3 pi over 4. And then it's going to be sine, so it starts here at 0, up to 1, down to 0, down to -1, back to 0. There you go. Cool. All right, let me know if you have any questions. Peace.